When the IMM 5670 Group of 5 Undertaking form opens in your Adobe Acrobat Reader, it will look like this. And you'll know it's opened in the reader when you can see the Save, Reset Form, and Print Form buttons. If you are undertaking a blended Visa Office referred sponsorship, you're going to check this box here and type in the profile number of the refugee you have been matched with. If you are not sponsoring under the Blended Visa Office Referred program, you will not check this box. Under Section A, you're going to provide the information about the group members. So you'll start with group member number 1. And typically, this would be the primary sponsor. So the individual that your group has decided will be responsible for ensuring that all of the application forms and documents have been filled in complete and correctly and uploaded in the permanent residence portal. You would put in the primary sponsor's family name and then any given names they have. You will insert their date of birth. You can do a quick year change by clicking on the numbers up here and use the back arrow to choose the correct date. Unique client identification number. If you have already sponsored a refugee or you have already interacted with Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, and they have given you a unique client identification number, if you know it, type it in this space here. Next, you're going to type in your relationship to the principal applicant. You're going to insert your home address, where you live currently in Canada. You may get this warning message here that this field must be completed before you continue filling the form. So this is a requirement that you must provide your own email address when you're filling the information. So make sure you put your email address. And each sponsor should have a separate email address, their own email address. Then move on to group member number 2. Remember, for a group of 5 sponsorship, you need a minimum of 5 group members to be able to sponsor. You may, however, add more than 5 group members if you have more than 5 that are willing to participate in the settlement and financial responsibilities for this group. To add an additional group member, you would click here. If you made a mistake and you don't have a 6th group member, then you can click here to remove that record. In Section B, you're going to fill out the information about the person you're going to sponsor, so the principal applicant. So you're going to insert their family name here, their given names here, and you're going to insert their gender, female, male, or another gender. Then you'll insert their date of birth, their place and country of birth, and their marital status. You will also select their primary citizenship, and if they have a second citizenship, select the secondary citizenship here. Next, you're going to choose whether this principal applicant has additional family members to add. If they are a single individual, you would select no. If, however, they are married or they have dependent children or both, you would select yes. When you do so, you have the opportunity to insert the information about the first family member you're going to add. Typically, if they are married, you will add the information for their spouse. So insert the family name of their spouse, their given name, what their gender is, their date of birth, place and country of birth, their marital status, and their relationship to the principal applicant. If it is a spouse or common law partner, you would select the top option. Next, you're going to select whether this person is going to come to Canada at the same time as the principal applicant. If they are, you're going to select accompanying. If they are not going to come to Canada at the same time as the principal applicant, you will select non-accompanying. Now, you do have to choose one or the other, and you do have to include all family members that are dependent upon the principal applicant. You need to be truthful. If you do not include their family members on the application, then there is a lifetime bar in place in the Immigration Refugees Protection Act that prevents family members from ever coming to Canada if they have not been named on this application. So make sure you include them whether or not they are presumed missing or dead, or even if they never intend to come to Canada at all. You must still include their information. In particular, if you are including dependent children, you would click Add Additional Family Member. And when you start to insert the names of your dependent children, you will also include dependent children from a previous marriage. And the reason for this is if the other parent from that previous marriage is unable to care for that child anymore, or perhaps they have passed away, then the opportunity to bring those dependent children to Canada at a later date exists because they are entered in here. Now, whether or not you plan to have those children come to Canada at a later date or not, whether or not you have a relationship with those children, you still must include their information here, because failing to do so will call into question your credibility, the idea that you are not being truthful with all the information on your application. When you have multiple family members that have different application forms, so for example, if you have a father and mother with their two children who are 10 and 5, but they also have a dependent child who is 20 years old. The 20-year-old would need to fill in their own generic application form, and the principal applicant, the spouse, and the other two children would be on a second generic application form. So the way to link those two sponsorship applications together is to do so here on the Undertaking document. And you will do so under Section C, Linked/Multiple Sponsorship Applications. So you're going to list any of those other sponsorship applications here. We're going to put the dependent child's name here, their date of birth, and if you happen to know their G number, say the application had been submitted previously, you could put their G number here. If you do not know their G number, then you can leave that section blank. If you have more than one application to link with this application, you will click the Add Application button here. If, however, you made a mistake and you don't have more than one to link, then you can select Remove Application here. Scrolling down to Section D, this is the Settlement Needs Checklist. You're going to check the appropriate boxes next to each of the responsibilities, and you're going to identify who will provide the support and give any additional details that you may have about this particular responsibility. So, for example, there are some responsibilities that will take place throughout the duration of the sponsorship period. And then there are going to be responsibilities that take place before their arrival and at the time when you receive the notice of arrival transmission. There are also responsibilities that take place upon arrival and within the first 3 weeks. And there are responsibilities that take place during the first 3 months after arrival, as well as 4 to 6 months after arrival, 7 to 9 months after arrival, and from months 10 to 12 after arrival. Now let's go back to the top and we'll discuss some of these. So the responsibilities that you have to do throughout the sponsorship period is to ensure that transportation is available to and from their appointments and activities. Now you can check mark this, and there will be a person responsible to make sure that the newcomers you have sponsored will have access to transportation. So whether this is from the sponsorship group, that certainly can happen, but they also need to have the freedom to choose to take the public transportation. And when it comes to providing funds at the time of arrival, you need to ensure that they have the equivalent amount of money for a monthly bus pass for each person who is 18 and over. That is so they can purchase a bus pass, and your responsibility for transportation is to assist them in accessing transportation and teaching them how to use various modes. Perhaps teach them how to use the bus, how to use the subway if you're in a location that has a subway. Teach them how to contact a taxi service or an Uber or those kinds of things related to transportation. And so you will type in the name of the member who is going to be responsible. And in fact, put more than one person from your group, because it's always good to have a backup person in case the other person is unavailable and can't be reached. You'll also have someone responsible for arranging interpreter services. Someone will be responsible for ensuring that the children have the appropriate child care. And there will be someone to update the refugees' contact information with IRCC as required, and someone who will review and update the settlement plan as required. If applicable, ensure a contingency plan is in place for supporting family members who may arrive later in Canada under the 1-year window of opportunity. And so when you mark someone on the application as unaccompanied, they have the opportunity to be sponsored under the 1-year window of opportunity program. And so if that is going to happen, you have to have somebody in your group responsible to make sure that that 1-year window of opportunity form is submitted to IRCC before the end of the sponsorship year. Now, again, when it comes to deciding who will provide the support and additional details, this should not be left up to just 1 or 2 people being named for all of these responsibilities. It should be equally distributed between the 5 group members, because the activities and the responsibilities for sponsorship is a big job, and 1 or 2 people will burn out if they try to do it all by themselves. So you want to make sure that each person has responsibilities and that they are there to support and back up each other when someone goes away on holidays or if someone gets sick. So I'll leave it to you to read through all of the rest of the responsibilities. And while these are some of the responsibilities, it doesn't include everything that needs to be done for settlement. We do have a document called the Post-Arrival Responsibilities, and you are encouraged to read that document to understand more fully what your responsibilities are at the time of arrival.
When you have assigned each person to these various responsibilities in the form here, you will also want to include some details about those responsibilities. And if you find that you don't have enough room to insert additional information, you can certainly include an additional Word document to provide additional details regarding your settlement plan.
Once you have finished all of the responsibilities here, you're going to go into the section where there will be a cost estimate to help you predetermine if you have sufficient funds that you are committing for this sponsorship. Now, the number of persons in the sponsorship application, that is being entered at the very top. So right now it's showing as 0, so that means I haven't inserted the information that needs to go into this form. I'm going to scroll to the top and make sure I have entered in all of the information. Yeah, I think it's the person that we are sponsoring. We haven't filled in their information. So we need to put in their information for it to register that we have someone we are sponsoring. Now, when I have filled in the information for the principal applicant, when I scroll down to the section on sponsorship cost estimate, you see it's showing a family size of 1. And you can see it automatically calculates that the minimum financial requirement for a single individual is $16,500. Remember, this is the sponsorship cost estimate. This is not the amount that you will be providing when they arrive in Canada. That figure will likely be higher than $16,500.
Now let's scroll back to the top and see how the figure changes when you add a spouse to the application.
Once you fill in the information for the spouse, then you will see that the family size increases to 2. And again, the minimum estimate for the financial requirement is $24,800. And when you add a dependent child, you see that the minimum financial requirement estimate is $26,700. Now we're going to estimate the living costs in the expected community of settlement. So you can refer to the sponsorship cost table in Appendix A of the guide for the groups of 5, and it's linked here for you to help you estimate the amount that's the minimum requirement for each of these categories here. Now remember, the total living costs must equal to or be higher than the above minimum financial requirement for that family size. So when we look at household items, you want to insert the estimated amount that it will cost for purchasing all of these things. Now, if we were to go to Appendix A for groups of 5 to see how much the requirement is, you're going to go to the sponsorship cost table, and it shows you the breakdown of how much support you should be providing. So we have a family size 3. We should be providing $26,700, which we understand. Out of that portion, $6,300 is for startup costs, and that includes things like the household items, the basic food and things like that, clothing that you will be providing them. And then $20,400 is the month-to-month income support. So for things like groceries and their ongoing utility costs and their rent, that would be included in that amount. For blended visa office referred, there are slightly different amounts here. And this is because the Government of Canada shares the financial costs for blended visa office referred refugees. Now, you cannot refer your privately sponsored refugees for this program. This program selects refugees that are referred to the Government of Canada from UNHCR. So it is not possible to request the government to have your family member added to the blended visa office referred program. So there's a description of what startup costs include and what monthly costs include. You may make some in-kind deductions, and we'll get to that section in a little bit. But here's a list of the kinds of things that you may get as in-kind gifts. So donated gifts, if you have somebody who is willing to provide a bedroom set or some things for the kitchen, pots and pans or dishes, you can get those things donated as a way to reduce the cost of sponsorship. But keep in mind, you can't reduce the cost of sponsorship down to zero. The refugees, when they arrive, they will receive funds from you to live on a monthly basis. And they will receive a startup cost because they need to have the freedom to make their own choices on what they would like to purchase for themselves for their home. There are also some rules about things that have to be purchased new and things that cannot be used. And here's the table that shows you the minimum breakdown of costs for these items. So for example, you can only have clothing donated in kind at $365 maximum. So you may have clothing that is worth more than $385, but that's the maximum amount that you can use to deduct the cost of sponsorship. The same goes with furniture. You can deduct the cost of furniture to a maximum of $1,085 for a single individual. And the same with their household needs, $300 for a single individual. Linens is $80, and food staples is $105. Now, there is a significant amount of savings you can provide as in-kind for shelter if you are providing their accommodations at no cost to the refugees you're sponsoring. So if, for example, they are family members and they'll be living with you in your home, then the maximum you can reduce the cost of sponsorship by for a single individual is $7,008 for the cost of shelter. And so you will check the family size and look across the chart to see how much you can deduct for that particular family size. So the family size we have is a family size 3. So these are the maximum deduction amounts that we can apply to reduce the cost of sponsorship. So when you are inserting the amounts for startup costs or for ongoing monthly costs, they will need to be in excess of those amounts. So donated items is when we are referring to those in-kind contributions. So again, the maximum amount that you can insert for a donated item of shelter is the amount from the cost tables. So shelter is $10,632. We should not be putting in more than $10,632 for the total amount that we can reduce. And when it comes to furniture, the maximum amount we can reduce it by is $2,016. And for clothing, $1,033. Household effects or household needs is $350. Linens is $240. And of course, food staples is $195. Now, if you have dependent minor children for the principal applicant, there will be an amount for school fees and supplies that can be reduced in kind, if applicable. So for example, if somebody is going to purchase their notebooks and pens and pencil crayons for them, you can reduce the cost. You'll have to take a look at the post-arrival requirements or the Appendix A to find that information. So in this case, I'm going to put $50 for school fees and supplies. You can see that here it breaks down automatically for me the living costs. It is calculated based on the minimum financial requirement that the living costs will be $26,700, that I have $14,400 $516 as in-kind deductions. Therefore, I need to have a minimum of $12,184.
Now let's scroll back up and take a look at the one-time startup cost amounts and the monthly amounts that we'll need to enter.
I'm going to say that it's going to cost $3,000 for this family's household items, and furnishing, let's say $4,500. Linens, we're going to say $300. Food staples, to get the things that they need before they arrive, things like flour, sugar, rice, spices, let's say $300. And clothing, I'm going to do $2,000. And utility connection fees, let's say that's $450. And school fees and supplies, I'm going to say $300. You also have to provide ongoing monthly costs. So their basic needs for food and incidentals for a family of 3, $500 or $600, I'm guessing, per month. And then for shelter, we're going to say that it's going to cost this family of 3, they'll probably have a 2-bedroom apartment. And if they're living in Toronto, for example, that's going to be quite a significant amount of money per month, probably $3,000 or more. Public transportation for each adult who is 18 or over. In the city of Toronto, I believe it is nearly $200 for a bus pass. I'm going to say $360 for the two. And the communication allowance, I believe that one is $75 for the household. But the internet connection as well, let's say $175 for the household. So as you can see, the total cost annually is actually $60,000 for this family, and a significant amount of that is for their shelter. So if you can find lower cost shelter, perhaps you can get somewhere for $1,500 rather than $3,000. You will reduce the cost of sponsorship. But as you can tell, the cost of sponsorship is significantly high based on the amounts that you insert here. And those are realistic amounts. You're going to want to research and see how much it costs to buy furnishings and food staples in the location they are going to reside in.
There is a website you can go to get information on the cost of living in the community of settlement. This website is called Numbeo.com. In particular, you want to go to the page called Cost of Living. So do a Google search for Numbeo Cost of Living, and you should land on this page here. You can start by selecting the country, Canada, and then you want to select the city in Canada. So I think we're going to select Hamilton, Ontario. It also tells you which cities are nearby, such as Oakville, Guelph, Brampton, Kitchener, Toronto. So I know I have the correct location. And you want to ensure that your currency is selected as Canadian dollars, which is the default. Now, this gives you the average cost of living for persons who live in this area. And this data is compiled by people who contribute information that live in these areas. And so at the top here, you see for restaurants, if somebody was to go out and eat an inexpensive meal at a restaurant, they would generally spend $20 Canadian. And I would agree that's relatively average in a cost for purchasing an inexpensive meal at a restaurant in Hamilton, Ontario. And it can give you even further breakdowns. If they purchased a beer or a cappuccino, generally they'd spend about $5 for a cappuccino. And then it gets into markets. How much does it cost for a gallon of milk, a loaf of fresh bread? So these are general estimates of how much you can anticipate that the refugee family may be spending to get basics for their groceries. and on average, how much they're going to spend for transportation, on average, their utilities, for leisure activities, for childcare, clothing and shoes, and on average, how much the rent is per month in this location. And so this is very valuable information for you to use when you are inputting the information for your settlement plan. Now let's go back to the G5 settlement plan and see the comparison between the cost of living amounts as compared to the financial requirement for sponsorship, which is based on the sponsorship cost tables.
The financial requirement for sponsorship is $23,000. That's not a realistic figure. It's an estimate of how much the minimum amount is that you need to provide. And it's not an actual cost of living amount. So keep that in mind. This is more realistically the amount of money you will be providing when they arrive. This section here, section 5, is where you will provide who is giving funds to the sponsorship. So if you have a funds held in trust account, you will indicate how much money is in that account. And we're going to say there's $15,000 in that account. And then you have to read the guide to understand how to prove and explain where the funds were obtained for the money that was put into that account. Now, if the primary sponsor is going to commit some funds, then you need to put how much they're going to commit here, as well as any other members who are going to commit funds. Now, if you notice, we've only got $15,000, $5,000, and $2,000 committed for this sponsorship. That is a total of $22,000. That's how much the total is that's committed. But the financial requirements is estimated to be $23,754. There's a shortfall of $1,754 showing here. And it's showing up red because there should not be a negative amount here. So the way to change this is to increase the amount of money that is being provided. So if there was another group member who is going to contribute additional funds, you'll see that the amount has gone into the black. So it's showing that there is $746 additional beyond what is needed. And in fact, it's a good idea to have at least that much higher because you will need more money at the actual time of arrival. So if you want a realistic understanding of how much you're going to provide, you will want to show that you have much more than is required. So maybe even another group member who's providing $5,000. So now you're $5,000 more than what is required. It's still not quite near the amount that the actual cost of living is going to be. Maybe if we want to increase that, we're going to show that much. And maybe the fifth person is going to provide $5,000 as well. This is a more realistic picture of the cost of sponsorship at the time of arrival, because we've already estimated how much it's going to cost for their annual amounts. We came up with a total of $38,000, which is a realistic idea of how much it's going to cost when they come. So showing that you have $40,000 is definitely going to reassure IRCC that you have a significant amount of money for that sponsorship. Granted, you could show the lower amounts. IRCC will evaluate your case, and it is possible that they may approve you on these figures here. But you do need to realize at the time of arrival, you are going to be held responsible and you are legally liable for those higher dollar amounts, which are the actual costs of living in the place where they are going to reside. Now, Section F is where you will see your obligations, consents, and declarations. These are the things you are understanding that you agree to and you are declaring as true. The last page is where you will insert signatures. And so you are allowed to insert digital signatures. So that means you are able to type in your name as your digital signature to sign the form. Now, the person whose name it is, so the group member number 1, that is the primary sponsor, they must type in their name to sign the form, and then they date when they did their signature. The second group member, they have to type in their name and date when they did their signature, and so on. You have to have signatures for all 5 group members, and they need to be dated. If you forget to sign the forms and date the forms, your application will be returned. So please don't forget to ensure everybody has signed this undertaking document. Once you have completed those signatures, you can save the information and save it to your desktop. And in fact, you can save it at any time. And you can print the form. I suggest that you choose Microsoft Print to PDF. Don't choose Adobe PDF for the printer because it will give you an error. You're going to select Microsoft Print to PDF and select Print. As soon as you print the form, that version will not be able to be edited. So I suggest you give it a different name. Call it Printed at the end of the name of the form. Once it has been saved, you should be able to find it on your desktop. I see it here, printed. Now, if I open this version, you can see that I cannot make any changes. So this is called the flattened version of the PDF form. I cannot make changes to it. So you want to make sure that you have filled in everything correctly and completed before hitting that print button. Okay, and if you had saved the copy of the fillable form as a different name, then you still have the ability to make changes to that form if you made a mistake and you want to correct it. That's it for the IMM 5670 undertaking form for groups of 5.